Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Experimenting with USD in Game Pipelines. We're so glad you're here. My name is Elisa Carpio, Tech Evangelist at Autodesk, and I will be your moderator. But first things first, let's start with introductions from our esteemed panel. We're going to start with TJ, then Bruno, then Francois.
Hi, I'm TJ Trentley. I'm a principal technical artist over at NetEase Games. I've been in the industry now for about 10 years working on various AAA titles and have spent a good chunk of that time also looking to some of the Pixar USD and Maya USD stuff.
Hi, my name is Bruno Ianco. I'm a principal physics programmer at Eidos, Montreal. I've been working in the game industry since 2007 and the last 10 years at Eidos, Montreal. Where at Eidos, Montreal, we do a lot of AAA games like Deus Ex Human Revolution, Thief, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Tomb Raider's franchise, and most recently, Marvel's Guardian of the Galaxy.
Hello, I'm Francois. I'm a lead tools programmer at Eidos Montreal. I was working at Eidos for the last 5 years, working on the Marvel Guardian of the Galaxy game. And I'm working as a tool programmer since the beginning of my video game career. And I was working with Bruno on the last game.
Wow, thanks everyone. And I'm so excited to be part of this discussion with you, as well as to be part of Game Developer Conference experience. Thank you all for being here with us. Now let's take a moment to ground ourselves on some definitions. And so this is for anyone in the panel. Here's the first question, and please do feel free to add. What is USD and what problems does USD solve?
Yeah, so USD is Pixar's Universal Scene Description format, which was launched as an open source initiative in June of around 2016. It was born from one of their proprietary animation softwares called Presto, which was launched in 2010 and then first saw use on the movie Brave. And of course, has seen much more use, in the past couple of years on a lot of their other productions they have done. USD was set to sort of solve multiple problems within their pipelines. Things like the need to generate, load, view, navigate, edit, store, and transmit large-scale data in a production environment. The need to collaborate serially and manipulating large amounts of complex data, and the need to support a more nonlinear workflow or pipeline in production.
You want to go, Bruno?
Yeah, sure. So and then the game engine industry, so for the game engine technology, so it's a non-destructive workflow. So it enables artists to do their work without interrupting a large team. And it also enables people to use a DCC package that they want.
Yeah, we can go from one DCC to another one without forcing ourselves to find the correct file format. And it's, as TJ said, it's non-destructive, so you can construct any scene on top of each other, and you can find any resources you want. So for example, the first and the biggest resource you can find are on the Pixar website. And after that, you have the Google group, the USD Google group, the USD Git, and of course, right now we have the Maya USD GitHub repo, where a lot of information are available and a lot of tools and code. So yeah, I think it's explain what USD is and where you can find resource.
Thanks everyone for setting the stage and defining USD and the problems and opportunities that it solves. Now I'd like to first transition to Eidos Montreal a bit. So Bruno and Francois, what problems or challenges do you and your teams face today that led you to think about and consider USD as a solution? And also, if you can, please add how did the adoption of USD solve these challenges?
I'll start. So we started at the beginning of last project. So we had to revamp our DCC pipeline and our file format. We use our own proprietary file format. So at the time we investigate a lot of file format. We settled on FBX because USD was not really popular at that time. And with that work done, so that opens the door to test other file formats. So we took a step, we look again at USD a couple of years later. and we find it was really useful, really easy to integrate in our in-house engine, and our engine was now supported multiple file formats, so it kind of opened up the door to more investigation on our production team.
As Bruno said, we were investigating, and trying to integrate USD was fairly simple thanks to the work Bruno and the core team were doing about the file format reading and integration. And as you can see on the GIF, it is a Pixar kitchen set directly inside our game engine. And once we were able to compile USD for Windows, because at this time it was a little bit complicated, but we found a lot of help with the USD community. Once this was compiled, we were able to integrate USD, first draft for USD in our proprietary engine in less than 2 weeks. And this is the first USD we were able to load inside our game engine. So it was to be able to, as we said, to go from one DCC to another and then directly into the game engine. Yeah, that's what it solved. It's going from one to another very easily.
That's pretty cool and so impactful. What benefits are you both seeing from teams so far who are experimenting or adopting USD?
The benefit is USD is an open file format, so everyone is contributing, and mostly it's a big movie studio which are contributing. So a wide community is using it. And so we know that it will be fast, it will be robust. And in the team which were using it were mostly artists, and they really like it to go from one DC to another. I don't know if you want to add something, Bruno?
Yeah, so as an engineering standpoint, so it's being open source, it's really kind of useful. So there's a lot of people, large community using it, and you can access the source code, and if you want to have a feature, you can discuss it. There's a lot of community around the world using that technology. So that's really useful for us.
Wow, thanks, Bruno and Francois, for sharing. I'm going to now switch to TJ. TJ, I know that in your past, and maybe your current work, you and your team dabbled in and tried USD. You heard what Bruno and Francois shared as their experience at Eidos Montreal. Could you share your experience? And maybe you can start with the problem you were trying to solve and then transition to sharing what you learned in the adoption or experimentation with USD.
Yeah, of course. So as Bruno and Francois sort of brought up when they were discussing this, is that we were also trying to solve, a very similar problem set. Just the idea of large scale like data manipulation in a production pipeline is starting to get heavier and heavier these days in games. So a lot of the things that we were looking at was just making our team's job a lot easier to actually produce this heavy content and use any application they wanted to sort of produce that. Things like our scene load times in Maya, for instance, were greatly impacted and, cost people a lot of time just sitting there waiting for them to load for animation. Our on-disk file size, and of course, in correlation, our sync times as well because of these file sizes. Concurrent user workflows, better asset management sort of in general. And then, of course, the universal aspect of universal scene description, being able to load the same asset in multiple different content creation softwares to edit without having to export or change that format in between was a huge thing for us, or at least something that we wanted to look into or at least experiment with in these cases. So looking at the scene file sizes or the file sizes, what we ended up doing is we did a test where we took a scene that was maybe about 1,700 individual assets, and we did a comparison of essentially what we had on disk for what their current Maya ASCII size was, a Maya binary comparison, and then of course a USD comparison against all of that. What we were looking to determine is see with a quick conversion, or at least, translating some of this data into USD format, would we get any gains from the universal scene description in terms of like the amount of content on a user's disk or a drive? Because what we were seeing, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of game productions out there now, is that we're eating up like terabytes of data on users' drives, or gigabytes, that kind of limits how much people can actually have sunk at any given time on their machine. So finding a smaller scene description format would definitely help with those sync times, as well as just the general management of that data in the future. So in our test, we took about 1,700 individual assets, where the total of our source assets was maybe around 4,000 megs on disk. Converting that to binary, or the binary versions of all of those, was maybe about 1,700 megabytes. And then compared to USD, they were only about less than 1,000 megabytes on disk. So you can see here that, compared to Maya ASCII, we were about at a 75% savings, give or take. And then converting to a Maya binary, it's about 45% reduction in cost on disk size. So obviously we take this data with a little bit of grain of salt. Maybe not everything was converted at the time in terms of like any of the proprietary data we had, but for the most part, the geometry, texturing, custom markup or attributes and metadata was all transitioned into this USD format, sort of loosely, just to get an idea of what that looked like. So in any case, at least taking a look at, the idea of we'd have our source Maya files and FBXs, or proprietary export formats, compared to just having a source USD file that we could use. There's a great benefit in that, at least from the user's sync time and just on disk storage. So one of the other points that I brought up too, as well, is that in terms of our scene load times, we had a lot of our artists, or we tested some of our scenes where we actually cataloged a lot of our cinematic scenes and how much time it actually took people to load into these animations in Maya to get working on a daily basis. And we can see from this chart here that we're looking at maybe an average of about 15 minutes for some of our heavier scenes that we had. This meant that on that average, we had a lot of our animators or cinematics people sitting and waiting at their machines after they loaded a scene, just for content to become workable and in a good state. So we did a comparison. Obviously, we took a look at our normal load times, through Maya. We had done some optimization there as well, using, referencing or asset references. And then we also took some of these scenes and we converted them into a loose USD scene format. And so what I mean by that is that, again, this wasn't something that's like, okay, this would be how we would finalize that scene in production, or how we would actually build that scene. But we just wanted to get a rough comparison that if we use USD's file format and referencing system compared to just, normal Maya ASCII scenes or Maya binary scenes to load all of our rig data, all of our content in a scene to get visually what the artist needed, how much time would that take? So looking here, we could see that, with some of these, especially, we didn't do this with all the scenes, but with the ones we did test, we went from about 18 minutes of load time to less than about 10 seconds to get into a workable state in Maya. And then same there for one that was around like 14 minutes as well. Given these types of results, we could also extrapolate that to a lot of our other cinematic scenes and probably feel pretty confident that on average, we would be loading these scenes, or artists would be able to get into these scenes and start working immediately within, 10, 20 seconds of actually loading the file. So that meant from them actually sitting there and loading these files and going to get coffee for 20 minutes or something like that, they're immediately to address the issue or start working on their task for the day. And while it does seem insane, that, it loads in less than 10 seconds. I think a couple years back, one of the Pixar's main scenes they use this on was it Finding Dory or Finding Nemo scene, where they showed this in real time. And it's kind of hard to believe until you see it, but it really does. It's amazing when you see this happen, that you take a scene that took like 20 minutes to load and you're immediately able to jump into it and start animating and manipulating everything in a Maya context. Just saves art and cinematics so much time in the long run of just being able to get work done. And of course, from a production side of things, that means that there's a lot more things that can get done in a day versus if you have to have an animator opening multiple instances of Maya and waiting for load times, and same with the exports and all that good stuff at the end of the day. So these were two major things that we were looking at. And then one of the minor aspects of it as well was just our asset management in general. With the way that USD actually structures a lot of its data and its files, how it's all referenced, and you can reuse a lot of different parts, we were able to kind of like test what an asset setup might look like and how we can compartmentalize the individual layers within USD to have each discipline on our art team own a specific layer that can then gets composited into a final asset at the end of the day. And this kind of goes to that concurrent user workflow where some of the smaller assets, this might not mean like a major, improvement, like a prop, like a barrel or a concrete box or something like that. This is mainly for larger things such as rigs or characters that you might be building and experimenting with, where you might want to have someone doing some texturing work on a character while someone else might be updating the geometry or updating the rig controls or things like that. So we experimented a bit with how that system would sort of look and the improvements that we got. And at the end of the day, as long as you set it up the layering correctly, you would be able to get this good concurrent user workflow that artists would then be able to use without having to worry about stomping on others' feet, because that's also another thing in production that we worry a lot about with file management.
Whoa, TJ. First of all, awesome results. I just learned so much from what you just said, and I want to thank you. But I also think that what you and Francois and Bruno shared is so inspiring. And I'm sure folks out there who are listening or watching this and are considering adopting USD can definitely learn from all of you. Okay, so let me switch things up again. I'd like to shift to our discussion to Maya USD plugin. For those out there who aren't familiar with Autodesk's Maya, Maya is a professional 3D animation, modeling, simulation, and rendering toolset. And they're designed for creating realistic characters and blockbuster-worthy effects. The USD extension for Maya brings you USD technology while making it really feel seamless in Maya. As much as possible. And then Maya's open source USD solution lets users create, edit, work with, and work in, and collaborate with USD's data. Now, Francois and Bruno, can you tell us about your experience working with Autodesk on the open source Maya USD plugin?
Of course. So we learned a lot from this experience, because we were inviting to the charter meetings, and when we arrived, it was with Pixar, DreamWorks, Blue Sky, big studios which have a lot of experiences by producing big movies. Sorry, and it was great because Autodesk gave us the opportunity to express our problems, and also we learned what problems they have in the movie industry. They are dealing with terabytes of scenes, big scene, and as TJ said, we are compositing a little scenes on our side. It's one asset per asset, but so yeah, this was a great part of the community. And the other part is the openness of the charters, because when we arrive with our little problems, we say, yeah, we have this problem. Say, okay, we can integrate it with the Maya USD plugin, and this was awesome. And another thing, this was the past Maya. This is the current Maya, and this is the future Maya, because Maya USD is not only working for USD, but it's also working for Maya. One of the biggest examples is, oh, look, we are working on the viewport and the fast displaying of the viewport. Oh, by the way, we are just dealing with hundreds of thousands of teapots, and look, it takes 2 seconds to display, and we were, wow. So we were able to do that, and they show that. And another thing is, Natalia, who is a designer on the team, say, hey, community, I was thinking about that. What do you think? And we were part of the designing of the plugin all together. And like that, the Maya USD team was pretty sure that everything was done right and for the community. So yeah, and anyway, during the testing, sometimes we had problems, and as soon as we had problems, we can enter the problem either in the forum or in the Git repo, and everything was replied and addressed. So it was great Yeah, we are big fans of shorter meetings. I don't know, TJ, if you want to add something.
Yeah, for sure. Being part of those charter meetings, I love just being like a fly on the wall for those most of the time. It's really nice just to kind of like see the entire roadmap, or at least where they're planning on taking, Autodesk is planning on taking the Maya USD plugin, and everything involved with that. And like Francois was saying, having a lot of the large film studios that are also working on USD at the same time and giving their input, it was very interesting to see the types of problems that they were facing on the film side and how they could be addressed by Maya USD. But also at the same point, games and film are getting closer and closer every single year, with techniques and formats and production, workflows, that it's a good insight to see, what are the types of issues they're encountering, and then what are the types of things that we might encounter as well if we start looking at Maya USD, or we start, utilizing USD, and just some of the problems that might be coming down the walkway in those regards. But it was also really nice just to see a lot of the all the new features that were being worked on for the Maya USD plugin. The roadmap for what we want to do to get to parity with, the Animal Logic plugins or the base Pixar USD plugins, how we're planning on extending that, absolutely making sure that they get our input into what would make this a better experience for artists. And so out of the box with Maya USD, it's fantastic because you get to just work in USD data in the Maya context. But they're doing a lot with the Maya USD plugin, and especially with the charter meetings, they're trying to figure out, well, what do we need to do to make this better for you guys? And addressing that, as we run into these issues or run into these sort of like edge cases, like, oh, is it possible that Maya USD could do X, Y, or Z? And they'd be able to give us feedback or spitball with us, a little bit about, oh yeah, we could definitely do something like this or like this. And then, by the next charter meeting, they might have an update or some additional information that we could use to help make those decisions, or just understand like the vision for where it's going to be going.
Bruno, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, just all really great. Sounds like really great experience learning and collaborating. Anything else?
One thing that was great is that we could give our input as a game industry. So USD was firstly made for film, so we could shape the way the Maya USD would be looking in the future. So that was our key point for us.
Yeah, to kind of like piggyback off of that too. Yeah, having the games input is definitely, it's a really cool experience because a lot of the stuff is usually made for film. So getting like the game input side and having that like taken into account when some of these tools or these interactions are built out is it's really nice to see. And it's really cool to see that reflected in, any of the updates that they might have.
I love that, because it's really about making it accessible across various industries, and really thinking about the customer, and that's you all, right? And how do you evolve something like that so that everyone could use it? Now, I have a follow-up question, but y'all started already answering this. How would you like to see Maya USD plugin evolve? What functionalities would be key for your workflows?
One key area that would need to be addressed would be the animation and rigging workflow. So as the game industry, we need to have better tools, better standardization, but that's not only Maya USD, but that's USD in general that needs some work in that area. I don't know what you think, guys.
Yeah, definitely having a more standardized approach to how to do rigging or animation. Well, I guess animations, is good in USD because it was mainly made for that, but it's more the rigging aspect. And that's something that has been brought up from what I've seen in terms of like, how do you actually solve this? And there's a lot of custom solutions out there to it, but having a more clear cut, like centralized path on like, hey, if you actually want to manage rigging in USD, this is what you can do to just get off the ground. With that, as opposed to building, some external system that you have that's referenced or linked in those cases. I can also say that another thing that I'd be interested in seeing, the Maya USD plugin to evolve to is incorporating some more of the user-facing tools to help content creators interact with the concept of variants, compositions, and or varieties in USD data. And I only bring this up because, while they're very straightforward, there's not really a great way to sort of set that up through any of the Maya USD interface stuff without having to build your own tool around the existing functionality. So it's more or less like, the ability to take what's already there and wrap it really nicely. So content creators understand like what's going on under the hood, understanding, you know, when I create a variant, what does that actually do? Or when I create an override, like how does it actually get applied and how some of those layers are sort of composed. I will say that Maya USD's scene composition tool that they have, or their layer composition tool, is really great at visualizing a lot of that type of data. It's just the creation of that data sometimes that might be useful to streamline or have some additional tool built into it.
Hey, TJ, you mentioned incorporating user-facing tools. Could you name what a couple of those tools are?
Yeah, for sure. You know, so in this case, you know, I know that there's some examples out there of, I think from Pixar, of their variant tools that they have, like for authoring variant sets or for authoring overrides in Maya. And I know other studios have, you know, in the film industry have obviously written tools like that too, to kind of wrap that. So having a standardized, you know, thing in a Maya USD plugin would be great. So essentially, if I have a user-facing tool for this type of thing as an artist, I go, hey, I want to create like a new variant set for this model that I'm working on. So being able to say, oh, I'm going to name it like a damaged version of this thing, and I'm going to reference this other USD file. And then when you hit like, okay, it'll compose all that together into your asset USD file. And that way you have correct referencing and setup. So you're not having to do anything sort of under the hood or manually set any of this stuff up. You're just kind of using a nice interface to go through and plug things in to correct spots.
Thank you for that additional for those additional ideas. I'm just really quite interested. Okay, folks, thank you so much for the answer there. Now it's the crystal ball moment for all panelists, starting with Bruno, then Francois, then TJ. How do you see USD evolving in the future? And as a follow-up to that, what other problems do you think or wish USD could solve in the future?
I'll start. So my dream or goal would be that the USD could be the one file format for everything in a game engine. So I'm not talking only about DCC export import stuff, but everything from in the game engine. In the game engine, you have the levels, you have objects. So imagine you can have one file format, so you can have your assets animation could be in the USD file format, and then you could have the trigger objects that even if you import it in DC, you could see it live in the DCC, so you can animate cinematics right as it was in the game engine. So that would be awesome. It could happen in the near future.
In addition of that, having the USD, you can also have high-res assets and regular resolution assets. So for the game, and the high-res asset will be for the cinematics, and you will be able, as Bruno said, you have the same scene inside your DCC and inside your game engine, but when you work in the DCC and if you want to do a big cinematics, you can just work with high-res assets. And yeah, it will be awesome to have just one file format to rule them all. And yeah, it would be great.
TJ.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with what both of these guys here have said. You know, the idea of having USD become that standard, you know, file format between any of the softwares that a content creator might use would be a huge boon to a lot of the workflows that we have. I also think being able to have this incorporated into our game engines by default and letting us get access to like the scene compositions makes things like Francois was talking about like super easy for production. It just solves a lot of issues that we run into on a daily case in, you know, game environments, and having access to just utilize any of the scene composition stuff that Pixar USD provides would be fantastic.
I love all these ideas. I especially like what you said, Francois, about the one to rule them all. Now I'd like to ask each of you to name one thing that you would like the audience to remember about our discussion, specifically about USD or Maya USD plugin, or any lessons you've learned in your adoption or experimentation with this open source technology. We're going to start with TJ, then Francois, then Bruno.
Yeah, so the one thing, or I guess the one big takeaway, you know, from this is that USD right now in the game industry is very early on. There's a lot of experimentation going on. And there's a lot there to sort of learn and figure out, but there's so many benefits that we get out of it in our workflows from the game side of things. Even at a minimum, the amount of time you can save an artist or a studio in like large scene loads, like, you know, we had shown a little bit earlier, is worth the time in and of itself. You know, you save people from being able to sit there and twiddle their thumbs and kind of maybe like get frustrated at it to immediately getting to work on content they're very passionate about. And to, you know, to that, you know, it's very rewarding, you know, being able to unblock people in that way. So yeah, that's like the main thing, you know, for me when I'm looking into this. And then a little follow up to that as well is that USD in and of itself is a very large system. There's so much that you can do with it that it's almost overwhelming at times when you might first start looking into it. It is extremely worth it to just become familiar with the basis of USD and kind of just get familiar with the concepts that they have in there, and it'll all start, you know, to build on itself. But it is something when you first start looking into it that it's almost a little overwhelming because of how much it can do. Sort of like the blank page problem, you know, sometimes where you're kind of given this space that you can do almost anything you want with it, that it's overwhelming. But that's yeah, that's kind of what I'd have to say to that one, at least.
My side, what thing is the Maya USD community and the USD community at large, but they are very welcoming and very helping. So there are nothing dumb, there's no dumb question, no stupid question. You can always ask, and yeah, they want to build the best world, the best tools for everyone, and yeah, it's a very welcoming community, and it was great to be part of. It's great to be part of this community and to be able to give our feedback, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
On my side, so integrating USD in our game engine was not that hard, so it's really easy to integrate in the existing engine. So now compiling even on Windows, it's kind of simple now, so it's really good. And being open source, it's really good, so we can have an input on the whole community and pushing the standard forward so that it can improve over time for the game industry in general, and maybe even in the film industry.
Thanks, everyone. I think it's always cool to leave folks with the one thing that you'd like to impart. Now, before we close, I'd like to invite you, all of you, to visit our What's New in 3ds Max page in order to learn all about the exciting things all about the exciting stuff happening with USD that's also being done inside 3ds Max. It's currently in public beta. So if you'd like to collaborate with the product team and contribute your ideas, please do so by going to, this is not gonna roll off my tongue, so I'm gonna say it slowly, autodesk.com/campaigns with an S /3dsmax-usd.feedback. Totally would love to see the community, you know, take part and collaborate with us. We'd also like to invite you to check out Autodesk's landing page called makeanything.autodesk.com/USD. Here you're going to find more information about USD, but also about how to get started in Maya and 3ds Max. And finally, you'll also get a chance to check out our open source site, which is opensource.autodesk.com. Now, with that, panelists, a round of thanks to all of you. It was so much fun just trying to, you know, learn a bit, but also just seeing all of the great things that you all have uncovered with USD and your experience with Maya USD. A huge thank you to you, but also a huge thank you to the audience that's watching this and for hanging out with us. With that said, thanks everyone. We'll see you at the conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.